Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and here's this week's quick tip for luthiers. You know, every guitarist seems to love a guitar that's finished with a mirror-like high gloss shine, and that can be a real challenge for luthiers to execute because it seems no matter how hard you try, there's always those faint little scratches that you can see. They're not always visible in every light, but as you move a guitar from one light source to another, you start to notice these scratches that you didn't even know were there. So the question is, how do you get rid of those? Well, in truth, it's not really an idea of getting rid of the scratches. It's more of an idea of avoiding the scratches in the first place. And there's several rules of thumb that you can follow to do that. First of all, you have to use high quality sandpapers. And it doesn't matter whether you're wet sanding or dry sanding. You've got to use high grade sanding grits. If you use the cheap stuff, it's going to show. Another thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that that sandpaper is kept as clean as possible through the entire process. Now that's easy to do with wet sanding because the water or the liquid that you're using, it could also be naphtha or mineral spirits, that helps to evacuate the residue and keep the sandpaper clear. With dry sandpaper and dry sanding techniques, you have to be more conscientious of keeping the sandpaper clean, but that's absolutely necessary to prevent unwanted scratches in the finish. Now, another thing you need to do if you're wet sanding is you need to use an adequate amount of fluid to make the process as efficient as possible. And I like to go with at least a half a quart for a guitar. More if possible. If you've got a large enough container that can hold a quart of water, go with that, because that amount of water does a better job of dispersing the residue and any loose abrasive grains than it does if you were to use a smaller. If you were to go down to like a pint of water, for example, you'd be concentrating that residue and those abrasive grains in that smaller amount of water, and that makes it more difficult to keep the sandpaper clean as you're working. So a larger container of water is necessary, or whatever fluid it is you're going to be using. Another thing you need to do is, after you finish sanding with one grit and you get ready to move on to the next grit, you need to start with fresh liquid if you're wet sanding. Fresh water, fresh naphtha, fresh mineral spirits. You can't just keep using the same fluid with every grit that you use, because as you're sanding, you may not realize this, but some of the tiny grit particles can come off and into the fluid. And so if you're sanding with 800 and then move to 1000 grit, there's a good potential that you're going to pick up some of those 800 grit abrasive grains onto your 1000 grit sandpaper and continue sanding with it. And you're going to get 800 grit scratches in your 1000 grit surface. And that's a bad thing. That's something you don't want to do. So fresh liquid with every grit. Another important rule of thumb is everything needs to be cleaned off in between grits. So when you finish with that first grit, you have to clean the entire surface of the guitar as thoroughly as possible and get rid of every bit of sanding residue and any potential grains of abrasive that may remain from that grit. The other thing you need to do is to clean the area that you're working in thoroughly. You don't want to pick up any stray abrasive grains that may be on the surface of where you're working. And one of the things that I do is I buy, they're called adult incontinence pads, underpads. And you can get these at the dollar store. They usually come 2 to a package. And what these are is like a 30 by 36 inch absorbent pad. And these are meant to be placed on a mattress and to protect a mattress from, incontinence or bedwetting. And they're an absorbent material. And what I'll do is I'll pick up enough pads that I will have one pad per abrasive grit that I'm going to use. So if I start with 800, I'll sand with one pad, and then when I'm finished, I just take that pad and toss it away. The cool thing is it's absorbent, so you can splash around as you're wet sanding. You don't have to worry because this thing will absorb that water. But you throw it out, and before you start with the next grit, you lay down a fresh, clean pad. So you're always keeping the work surface spotlessly clean. So basically, those are just a few of the rules of thumb that I like to follow when it comes to level sanding my guitar finish so I can achieve that beautiful mirror-like high gloss shine without even the slightest scratches in the surface. So give those a try. Take care, and we'll see you in the next quick tips and in a future episodes from the Luthier's Workbench.